Welcome to Alas, Vine and Hitchens. I am Sarah Vine.
And I am still Peter Hitchens.
This week, Peter is going to be talking about babies. And I shall be asking, why the fuss over digital IDs when we have all been slaves to the digital realm for years already? We'll be back after this. Welcome to Alas, Vine and Hitchens. I am Sarah Vine.
And I am Peter Hitchens.
And this week we're talking about babies. Peter would like to talk about babies. And I would like to talk about why everybody's making such a fuss about digital IDs, given that basically we are already slave to the digital. I can't say digital. Digital.
Well, don't worry
realm.
about it. Lots of people can't say one word.
I mean, it just
we know that you mean digital.
Digital.
There must be a word can't say, but it's not. I don't have one handy at the moment.
I can't believe there's a word that you can't say, Peter.
Oh, I'm sure there is. There's a word. There's words I won't say, which is another matter altogether.
Prestidigitateur. Can you say that?
I always thought it was prestidigitator, but I don't know.
Well, there you go. Anyway, that's not the topic. The topic is that everyone's cross because Keir Starmer says he's going to bring in digital IDs to stop migrants. And I just think we already have digital IDs. We can't do anything in this world without leaving a digital footprint. Literally nothing. You can't even buy a parking ticket without leaving a digital footprint. So we've already got digital ID. So what's the difference?
Well, the difference is that a digital ID would be controlled by the state. If your bank or a parking organisation or even the railways want to have all kinds of details about you, as long as they're confined to the bank and the parking company and the railways, it doesn't matter. But if the state obtains all the information about you that there is to have and controls it and is able to give it to people if it wishes to, or keep it to itself or use it for various purposes, then it becomes quite different. If it all runs together into one thing, then you can see it's already happening in Peking. That if you're a Chinese citizen, then you're watched the whole time. And if you transgress, and this is just in matters of behavior, you've heard of social credit. If they don't think you're behaving or thinking in the right way, then they stop you from buying long-distance railway tickets or long-distance airfares. You can't do it. When you go out into the street, you're tracked with facial recognition of a kind which is now spreading in London as well. And every single part of your life is both watched and controlled by the state, which believes it to be benevolent. And once you permit the state to have this information centralized about you, you give it total power of you. The idea that it's now quite nice because the person in charge of it is Keir Starmer is ludicrous anyway, but the idea that it won't get a lot nastier in future when other people get control of all these mechanisms is ludicrous. There is always that danger. You give a power to the state, it never gives it back to you later, and a future state may be a good deal more menacing than the one you're used to.
I agree.
So you have to say no at crucial points. This is a crucial point. We all agree there's an awful lot of interference in our lives, far too much. And I sometimes I don't often stay in hotels in this country, but when I do, I sometimes get asked for some form of ID. Do you, by the way, know what the D in ID stands for? Because I don't. Anyway, you're asked for it, and they ask for a driving license. And for many years, I did not have a digital driving license. So that was no good. Or for my passport, which I don't carry about with me on domestic journeys. And I remember having a big battle at some party conference in a Hilton in Manchester. They insisting they wouldn't let me check into the hotel until I produced. And I said, you have no...
Well, that's a European thing.
No, it is, but they had no lawful authority to demand this. And eventually, after the manager was called, they confessed that they were wrong and I was right. And they stopped. But most people would have given in. And I think the real problem with modern Britain is that people are docketed and followed and photographed and tracked and registered far too much, and they give into it far too much, and that's why it happens. But if you give into this, frankly, I won't be at all sorry for you. You're giving into a total level of state control, which is limitless in its effect.
But my argument is that they already have a total level of
control
over us.
They haven't.
For example, just a really bizarre, stupid thing, but both me and my daughter have been locked out of Vinted. Do you know what Vinted is?
I do.
Peter? So we can't use our Vinted accounts anymore. And do you know why that is?
Well, because Keir Starmer has ordered that you shouldn't be able to use them, presumably.
Well, basically, yes, because we're both politically compromised people. And so therefore they
you're having banking trouble then? So
Vinted uses a bank which I think is based in Luxembourg, one of those places. And this bank has decided that Beatrice and I, because of her surname and because of my ex-husband are politically compromised people. And they think that by me trying to sell my old shirt on Vinted, I'm somehow engaging in complex money laundering behavior.
But this is the bank doing it. It's not. This is
well, no, but it's because the digital, my digital footprint is says that I'm potentially a politically compromised person, which means basically I'm already totally under the control.
Where does it say this?
Well, I've no idea because if you try to have a conversation with these people, it is literally, I mean, it's an overused term, but it is Kafkaesque because you telephone them and then you speak to someone in Belgium and then they put you through to somebody in Luxembourg and then they put you back to somebody in Belgium and then they usually hang up on you. And I've tried over and over and over again I'm quite a prominent journalist.
You're not a prominent journalist in Luxembourg, are you?
Well, no, but I mean in the UK, and I've tried talking to the Vinted team in the UK. So my point is these things already exist.
Well, they do exist on the continent. Yes, they do.
Already heavily curtailed by this sort of information, and it means that we're already completely enslaved by this stuff.
Well,
it's too late. We all have digital passports. When you go through your passport gate and you put your little passport in the little digibox, that's already a digital ID.
Well, that's true. If I choose to leave my country, then I accept the laws of the countries to which I go, and which are often laws I would not myself support if I were a citizen of those countries, but I'm not. And any form of foreign travel puts you in that position. So although I would rather not have that, it's something that it seems reasonable to ask. I think your problems with Vinted come from the fact that Vinted, for reasons which I can't imagine, could it possibly be because they want to pay less tax, have based their bank in Luxembourg. And the Luxembourg banking regulations presumably have some strange rules about politically sensitive persons, and you've fallen foul of those. That's not proof that we already in this country have working and comprehensive digitized identity system, because we don't. And it can see that it's extremely annoying. And it's an example of what would happen and could happen in this country if we did. But it only happens to you because of Vinted's curious desire to pay less tax than they otherwise would, which is incomprehensible. But that's the reason for it. It's not if you were dealing with an organization which banks in this country, I doubt it would happen.
No, I mean
it's possible it would, but you would certainly have remember what happened with Nigel Farage when he was debanked.
Yes, exactly. That's
you
what I was
can
going to
make a fuss about it because this is your country, and you are prominent here, and you could make a fuss about it and almost certainly get it lifted. But I doubt whether you've even been to Luxembourg. Most people haven't. You're probably not known there. So you haven't got that power to resist. But one of the things about living in a country is that you have the power to resist arbitrary authority in that country to the extent that you retain that power. And in this country, under our constitution, you do have that power and that freedom.
I disagree. I don't think you do anymore. I don't think you have any power or freedom. I think these things just are done to you. And the thing is,
Nigel Farage managed to beat it.
Well, he did. But the thing is that, for example, the fact that our passports are now digitized, well, that it's done in a very clever way. You have a digital chip in your passport, which means that it's much easier for you to go through customs. It's much faster. So you do it because it's convenient. But one by one, we've given up all of our liberties in this respect. For example, I'll tell you another good example. This year's Notting Hill Carnival. This year's Notting Hill Carnival was not the usual sort of blood fest because they had facial recognition. And my children both went to the Notting Hill Carnival and they said, Mummy, it was much nicer this year because all the people who were there to cause trouble just didn't get in because they had facial recognition, and the police have them on a database because obviously they're already criminals. So all the usual sort of scumbags, drug dealers, etc., who were there, gang members, to have a fight, didn't get in, basically. So everyone had a very nice carnival and no one died.
But that's the authoritarian social contract, which the continental countries have had for generations, where you hand over a large portion of your liberty to the state in return for a level of security. And that's never been the contract in this country. In this country, the state has been limited to the things which we permit it to do, and we don't allow it to presume our guilt or to have authority over us unless we've committed an offence. And that's the difference. And these are two completely different concepts of life and civilization. And we, in this country, uniquely because of our particular and very unique history, have these protections which they don't have. We shouldn't give them up. Once you give them up, you'll never get them back.
But the thing is, Peter, Britain is not that country anymore. That's the problem.
Well, it's partly not that country because people like you keep wanting to surrender these points, and that's
no. I
you
definitely
say, "Oh, well, it's all too late anyway. It's all good." Now, I'm in the pessimism Olympics. I win gold every week in the pessimism Olympics. But honestly, there's pessimism and there's just giving up completely. There is ever since I can remember Charles Clarke. Remember him? That vintage relic of New Labour who used to go on and on about identity cards, and the Blair creature was claimed to believe in them as well. I don't know whether he...
No, he's very keen on them, wasn't he?
He thought he was. Whether he actually understood them or indeed anything else his government was doing remains in question. But Clarke was really hard on it and got very, very cross when you criticised him for being an authoritarian. But they went on and on because they thought, the whole New Labour apparatus thought, we're very nice, we're the nicest people who've ever run Britain. How can anyone possibly not trust us with every single personal detail of their lives? Let's be like Estonia, I think was the model. They're going back to it now. Let's be like Estonia. Everybody's registered. Everything about everybody is known to all state organisations, and no danger at all results from that. I tell you, when we had identity cards in this country during the Second World War, one man was prosecuted for failing to have one. And he was prosecuted at the end of the war when they caught him for some reason. I can't remember his name, but it was a very, very emphatically Jewish name. And it was obvious why he had not registered his identity in 1939 when he'd been ordered to do so, because he thought, well, if the Germans arrive here, I don't want them to be able to find me the moment they come. And that's why he hadn't done it. I once did an examination of what use identity cards were in this country during the Second World War, and the answer is absolutely no use at all to anybody for any purpose of any kind. They were completely useless, and they also became extremely unpopular because in the post-war period, a jumped-up authority kept using them to make people's lives a misery, which was exactly what. And there was a great revulsion against them, and eventually it was so great that I think the Conservative government in 1952 got rid of them, and the only relic of them was so many as my parents' National Health Service numbers were their former identity card numbers. That was the only ghost of it still in Britain until quite recently, that some older people still had that number. And that was the only thing. But they were really, really, really unpopular once they existed, and they were no use at all. Say no, Sarah. Just say no.
No, but I'm not saying that we should do it.
Yes, you are.
What I'm saying is that I'm not saying that.
Yes, that's exactly what you're saying. It's all too late.
It's already done.
But it isn't.
It isn't.
Done. You've got to distinguish between what we have and what.
Under Tony Blair, when he wanted to bring in identity cards, we still lived in an analog age. So actually, it was a good thing to resist them because we could resist them because we lived in an analog age. Now that we live in a digital age and everything is tracked digitally, it is literally irrelevant whether or not we have a digital ID or not a digital ID. And what's going to happen with this government is that they are in so much trouble with the out of control migration. They're going to dangle it in front of everybody and say, well, this is how we can get migration under control.
But it won't work.
Everybody has to have a digital ID. And people will go, people who normally would have said, no, that's not a great idea, will go, oh, okay, fine, all right, let's do it.
It's manipulation.
And that's how we will end up with it.
But look, if you're prominent enough to, for instance, object, as you would do if you'd been debanked in this country, then you also have a position in this country where you should be objecting to this thing. I don't agree that it was an analog age when the Blair government was in power. It was very much moving from being an analog to
it was the tail end of the analog age.
You could tell. Actually, from what I can see, the digital age was already born and thriving when I was at university in the 1970s. We just didn't know what was about to happen to us. But there's no doubt that the fact that we're moving into a digital age makes it more urgent to resist this. When you look at what the Chinese government does to people, and we can't
completely.
We can't. If that's going to happen here, I don't want to be one of the people who says, oh, well, I didn't see it coming or notice it. And you must distinguish between some organizations and companies having information about you, which you'd rather they didn't for commercial or professional purposes or whatever it happens to be, and the state at its center knowing everything about you and knowing it in secret, and also being able to have it wrong, totally wrong, and therefore to consign you to all kinds of horrors because it thinks wrong things about you. It's mixed you up with someone else, like that poor man who was traveling from Canada to Europe and was rendered by mistake by the CIA as he went through John F. Kennedy Airport and ended up in a torture cellar in Syria because the American state thought he was somebody else. This kind of thing can happen. It happens. People don't know enough about it.
It does happen. And then the problem is, as we all know, is that because the human element is taken out of all of this stuff, once you're stuck in a loop like that, you can't get out of it. But the thing is, don't we already have digital ID in the form of digital passports?
No.
So
I don't have to use my passport unless and until I go abroad.
Okay.
And while I'm living here, I don't have to use it. Anybody who asks me for it gets a pretty clear answer from me. No, I'm not. You've got no business asking for my passport.
Do you?
No, you don't have to have a passport. You don't. Whereas you had to have a passport in the Soviet Union when I lived there, but it was only valid for internal travel. If you wanted to travel abroad, you had to get another one.
I just think that the whole notion that we have any real freedom of movement or autonomy anymore is completely bogus. I just feel like everything we do is completely scrutinized.
Well, all I can say is just you wait until what you're saying we should give into is introduced, and you'll realize how free you are now, but you'll realize it too late because you will have lost it. That is the key thing. Everybody should be against this. I'm not saying we should give into
it. Well, there's the argument.
We
already have.
Well, we haven't. We're much freer here from this kind of interference than we are in the continent. Nobody can stop you in the street here and demand your papers. Every single continental country, in one form or another, the police have that power. The presumption of guilt operates. If the police question you, they're entitled to do so. They're entitled to presume you might be guilty of something so they can question you. And if you don't have your papers, they're entitled to lock you up for not having your papers. We do not have that here. It's a huge difference. Get rid of that difference and you overturn the whole relationship between the citizen and the state. The citizen becomes the slave of the state and the state becomes the boss of everything. And that is the moment when you concede that you have to carry identity papers, even if they're digital. The moment when you concede that is the moment when you give away your freedom and you become a slave. And it's very important that people resist it as hard as they can. The argument that will somehow control migration is also completely false. The French have an elaborate system of identity and an enormous black economy in which people avoid it. Huge numbers of unregistered people roam about France. The fact that they have identity cards doesn't make any difference to it at all. It means a certain amount of it allows a sort of
obviously the Labour Party corruption. Are trying to use that as are using it as an excuse.
It's complete fake.
Totally
and if people use fake arguments, then you must mistrust them. You can't just say, okay, all right, we'll give in.
Well, no, I have no intention of giving in. I'm just saying I think
you keep saying you do.
Well, I know I don't. I just think we've already lost it. I want to see your next column trumpeting resistance to this outrage. We've already got it. Nothing to worry about. Nothing will change. Well, we have already
it's not.
Got it.
No, we haven't. I keep explaining to you. If you think we've already got it, wait until we do.
Okay. Well, on that note, let's see what our listeners think about that. You can email us, alas@mailonline.co.uk. After the break, Peter and I are going to be discussing babies and the reason women are not having them. Why do you adopt
that tone of voice when you say babies?
Babies. Join us after the break.
Welcome back to Alas, Vine and Hitchens. I am still Peter Hitchens, and my question is this. What is the real reason why women are no longer having babies? Well, there have been many, many reasons over the past several centuries why the fertility rate has dropped, from the fact that people have moved off the agricultural land and farming and peasantry and moved into cities, and the introduction of workable contraception. But the reason which I'm talking about is the one which has affected the advanced societies of the world over the past, I suppose, 40 or 50 years. And it isn't really those things. What has happened is second wave feminism, which has told women that a wonderful world is available in which they can both have careers and have babies. And it's turned out for most women not to be true. Now, it's okay for very, very well-paid, highly professional women who can afford nannies to look after their children. But for the others who are forced to rely on what one might call basic childcare of the sort which now exists all over this country, the huge numbers of nurseries, one of the biggest burgeoning industries, apart from cannabis farms in the whole nation. That kind of childcare doesn't actually leave people with very much of an option. The life of many, many so-called working women, I call them wage slave women because I think the term working women demeans the very, very important and honourable work which women do in the home. But the so-called working or wage slave woman has a nightmare life in which she has to say goodbye to her children at a nursery or a school very early on, then rush off to work, then try to deal with all the problems of the family and the domestic problems, which she still has to handle, and eventually arrives home too tired really to enjoy or take full part in the parenthood, which is one of the chief joys of life. And the reason why I think I can say with some clarity that I'm right is the very fact which we're discussing, which is the declining fertility rate, the number of women who simply aren't prepared to do this anymore. It's a very unsatisfactory life. There's a very good summary of it. I don't have it to hand, but an American woman called Helen Andrews wrote a book recently called Boomers, in which she said that what women had done by accepting second-wave feminism's scorn for domestic life was that they had actually cut themselves off from an activity which most of them, it turned out, they quite enjoyed and found a great deal of satisfaction in. I myself think that the raising of the next generation is both the most pressing, urgent, and honourable task that anybody can do. I'm not saying here that men can't be the primary carers of children. Some can, some can't. I'm saying that in reality, it's always much more likely that that job is going to fall upon the woman. And the current arrangement we have for everybody except the very rich is not satisfactory. It leads to a lot of misery and discontent and feelings of loss. And it's not surprising that people are turning away from it.
Well, Peter, I have to say I disagree with you on most of that. I think you're correct that because of the biological imperatives, it is not possible for women to turn away completely from motherhood, because obviously they're the only ones who can have babies. But the idea that all women really want to be at home looking after children, I just don't think is true, unfortunately.
Well, it's not what I said, though. It's not that.
Well, it's one of the things you
not
said.
all women do. Some women definitely don't. But those who previously would have done are not able to, even if they want to.
Well, that's a moot point. They can if they have, for example, a partner who wants to support them and wants to stay at home so they can go out to work. But the point is that...
Well, it's very unlikely that will work because in our current society, 2 incomes are necessary for the basics of life.
Well, yes. But we've said,
therefore,
yes,
if either parent stays at home, then you only have one income. And what is more, I might add, because this is important part of the argument.
Me. Let me finish my sentence.
I'm not bullying you. I'm saying I'm making sure the argument proceeds on sensible lines rather than me being told I've said things I haven't. What is more, the tax and benefit system is very, very hard on anybody who tries to raise children without with one parent in the home.
No, that's correct.
Those families are actually forced through their taxes to subsidise those parents who do go out to work and get cheap nurseries on the state.
Yes, but I think that to go back to what you were saying earlier, I think the thing about women is that having babies and raising children is fine. It's exhausting, it's time consuming, it's difficult, it's often not very rewarding. This sort of myth that it's a sort of idyll of lovely children are difficult, tedious, messy, boring, quite often stultifyingly dull, I have to be honest. But they are, of course, lovely, and we must all have them. But the thing is that the idea that a woman is only fulfilled if she's looking after children is just not correct.
You're doing it again. I didn't say women are only fulfilled if they're looking after children.
You said that the second wave feminism has led us to this situation, and second wave feminism...
It's deprived people of a choice they used to have.
Well, I'm not sure that it was a choice that they used to have. I mean, you talk about only very wealthy women being able to go out to work and raise children. But most working class poor people prior to the 1920s, most women did have to work.
Well, we're not talking about...
Women have always had the rough end of this particular stick.
They haven't always.
I think they have.
No,
I think we got to a stage where one of the things that I find really tragic and difficult, and if I look back over generations of women, particularly in my family, and I see the way that they have ended up, and if you're a woman and you have your children, and that takes roughly 20 years more or less, give or take, depending on how many children you have, obviously, but you get to the age, you get to sort of your mid 50s, early 60s, and quite often the man that you've raised the children for buggers off with someone who's half your age. And then what do? You don't have a job. You don't have any way of making any money. You're financially dependent on someone who no longer cares about you or is interested in you. The state doesn't pay you very much because you've got no pension. And why have you got no pension? Because you spent your time raising children. One of the things I think we should do is, by the way, give women who stay at home a pension, a proper pension, so that when they are old and they are abandoned by their reckless husbands or whatever, ex-husbands, they are allowed to support themselves. The situation that we have now, I agree with you, it's not perfect, but women are no longer totally controlled by other people's whims as they used to be. Women are no longer at the mercy of, they have their independence. They have their own ability to earn money, to look after themselves, to take care of themselves if they want to. And that wasn't always the case.
Did you notice that I used the term second wave feminism?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. What was first wave feminism?
Well,
first wave feminism was first wave feminism was the social movement which actually got rid of almost all the things you just claimed women had to endure. So women were able to own property. Women went out to work. Women could join the professions. Women could go to the great universities.
But all of that leads to second wave feminism.
No, it doesn't lead to it. There's no logical connection between the two, in my view. One could have continued to exist. I speak. This is a bizarre fact, but it is true. My mother, in the late 1950s and early 1960s, was one of the few middle-class women who was married with children who went out to work. And she let, as a result, my brother and I run wild, and you see the results of this now.
Brilliant results.
Well, there you are. Others say differently, but the truth is, it was most unusual. And there existed a time when my mother had been in the Navy during the war, and as had an awful lot of her friends and many other women of her age and class had been in paid jobs, but they chose to stay at home and raise children, which was the general thing. And you talked about the 1920s, but I'm always accused of harping back to the 1950s. By the 1940s and 1950s, it was the desire of most working class men and lower middle class men as well, I think, a desire often fulfilled to be able to earn enough to make sure that their wives could stay at home and raise the children. And this is not just important for the mother and the father and the children, it's also important for society. If you don't have children raised by parents, then you have children raised by the state, or you have children not raised at all. And one of the many reasons why we suffer so much from disorder and so-called mental health problems and all the rest of it is because so many children have not been raised in families. And the other thing which happens is, where do you think the culture of a nation is handed on? In schools? Absolutely not. Where people actually pick up all the lore of the tribe to which they belong is in the home, and it's also where they learn how to behave. And there are an awful lot of people who are not learning how to behave because there is no adult in the home most of the time, and they're brought up by paid strangers who care for them on a basic level but simply will not give them the upbringing which parents ought to do and used to do, and it's a huge social thing. You complained about one more point, and then I'll shut up. But you made this point about men buggering off. Yes, men do bugger off, but the thing is, I am against men buggering off.
No, I know.
One of the things that absolutely basic to the whole point that I've been making since I started writing about this 25 years ago, is that the destruction of lifelong marriage by the state in 1968-69 and the introduction, in effect, of no-fault divorce at that point was a revolution which was very beneficial to selfish adults, but has been disastrous for children.
And for sort of more vulnerable people, not just women, but men too. But I mean,
true. A lot of men suffer from it.
A lot of men suffer from it. The trouble with your argument is that what you're suggesting, it works if you live in an ideal world where people behave honorably and decently. But that just isn't the world. And to be honest, it never was the world. But there were more constraints on people's behavior.
Sorry, I must interrupt you there to say I never said it was. I'm not a utopian. I know that all societies will be full of problems. I think you can choose between a worse set of problems and a better set of problems. And we've chosen the worst.
But the beginning of the conversation was about why aren't women having enough children? Why aren't certain women having enough children?
Yeah.
And I agree with you. It is a problem. And if we look at countries where women do have a lot of children, they tend to also be countries where women are constrained to the house, constrained in their behavior, unable to work. And there is a reason that those societies do that to women, because they want women to just be basically at home producing children and looking after men. And
Funnily enough, I mean, I wish I had here the person I know best who has 9 children, and you could put to her that summary of her life, she would laugh at you for the absurd presumption that having a lot of children leads to that kind of life. It simply isn't so. But I'm afraid she's not here, and I don't speak for her.
There are always exceptions.
It's bad enough for me to talk about childbirth being a bloke, but I can't speak for her. But I promise you, there are plenty of women with lots of children who do not live in those medieval conditions.
No, but there are lots of women who do live in those medieval conditions who are forced into doing that because they aren't allowed to do anything else. And I think that's not a great way to run a society.
Well, I don't think anyone does run a society in that way here.
Places like Iran run their country.
Yeah, but we're not there.
No, but I am just saying that both sides of this argument, you can end up in extremes either whichever way you go. But what we should do in our country, which is what we after all care about, is make it easier for women to have children and work, because that unfortunately is the only model that now exists. Because as you've said, people need 2 incomes in order to be able to support a home and a family.
It isn't. They only do that because of the social and economic revolution, which was launched by Betty Friedan.
We can't undo that.
You can undo it. This is the great thing about life, is you can undo lots of things. What do you think the Victorian age was but the undoing of the moral chaos and social collapse of the 18th century, resulting from largely, I have to say, from the preaching of John Wesley. It was a social revolution in which things were restored, which have been lost.
I'm not sure women came out terribly well of that sort of.
Say what? So women did better in the 18th century? I don't think so.
Well, I don't think anyone did better in the 18th century.
But the truth is, what you're saying is it can't happen, and I'm saying yes, it actually can. Good things which have been destroyed can be built up again.
But I just don't think you're going to persuade this generation, say of 18 to 25-year-old girls, that what they should really do is start producing children and get married and be looked after by their husbands. I just don't understand. I just don't think that's feasible.
They can reach the conclusion for themselves when they find out that what their liberation means is life in a call center and hardly ever seeing their children. And when people see that, they get to wonder what this liberation was that they were offered. If liberation turns out to be another form of imprisonment, people will turn against it. And I think they will. I think they are already doing it. And I think it's time that those people who discuss social and political and economic matters recognize that the experiment in forcing people into double income families to afford the basics of life and in forcing both parents to go out to work, leaving their children in the hands of paid strangers, has been a failure, both from the point of view of the adults and from the point of view of the children, and thirdly, from the point of view of society, which has large numbers of children who have not been, through no fault of their own, brought up to face a life in a civilized world.
But you'd have to bring in some form of tax incentive, I suppose.
You could stop disincentivizing, couldn't you? You should stop.
Well, how? How are you going to do that?
The moment the whole welfare tax and benefit system has, for many years, for instance, discouraged marriage. So that the rules which used to say if you got married there was a tax benefit from it, they went. The rules which, if you remember back in the 1980s, mortgages were subsidized by the state, but you got a bigger subsidy if you weren't married than if you weren't.
You could bring those rules back, but I don't think
I'm just giving these as examples, and then there is the way in which if you had a family in which one parent stayed at home and the other one didn't, and they lived on pretty much on the edge of things, part of the taxes which kept them impoverished are now being spent on subsidizing those families where both parents go out to work and the children go to nurseries. Now, all you need to do is stop punishing people who want to bring up their own children. But at the moment, our system, and it doesn't just punish them financially, it punishes them socially. There was a time when the BBC producers' guidelines said that the word housewife was a form of insult. The status of a woman working at home and raising the next generation was hugely diminished by law and culture, and you just stop deriding it, stop sneering at it, and stop penalising it with the tax and benefit system, and you might get more people doing it.
But Peter, I remember very vividly when I had my first child. I had Beatrice, and I was on maternity leave. I worked at the Times. I was on maternity leave for 5 or 6 months. I could not wait to get back to work. I genuinely couldn't wait to go back to work. I love my daughter dearly. We spend all our time together now. She's a brilliant human, but I found looking after a small baby really quite boring most of the time. And what I loved was I went back to work 3 days a week. So
well, you worked for the Times. You worked for one of the world's greatest newspapers. Most people don't hand over their children to strangers every morning so they can go work for the Times. They hand over their children to strangers so they can go and work in a call centre. It's not the same.
Go and work in, a lot of them do lots of very interesting jobs. They're lawyers.
And lots of very uninteresting jobs too.
Okay, there
lawyers
are also
and bankers. What proportion of women going out to work are bankers and lawyers?
Why was I working?
Not all Cherie Blair and Nicola Hawley.
Why was I working at the Times? Because I worked hard at school, I worked hard at university, and I worked very hard, and I got myself a good job
all your own merits, was it? No, it wasn't. Yes. Outside forces beyond your control played no part in the fact that you ended up working on the Times rather than in a call centre. If you'd worked in a call centre, it might not have been quite the same, is all I'm saying. Just imagine that.
Who knows?
Imagine that possibility.
I used to work in the body shop as a sales assistant. I really enjoyed that job.
I've mucked out pigsties as well, but it wasn't the course of my life. And you know perfectly well that working as a sales assistant
obviously the course of your life is something that you determine yourself.
No, it isn't. There are things which get in your way.
I don't think that all women who are working in call centres, and even the ones who do work in call centres might enjoy the fact that they get to spend time with people who are not
their children, who are not their children.
They might.
They might.
You have to understand that, because.
But why do you think it is that children why do you think it is?
Very isolating. There's a reason that women get postnatal depression because they're on their own.
Well, postnatal depression is another thing, I think, which but
the thing is that
we would need a medical expert to discuss the nature of. But
it can be very isolating. It's not always easy. It's not always easy for women to do it. Some women are great at it.
Put it like
some
this.
women are not so great at it.
Can I plant an idea in your mind? If there were more women staying at home, raising the next generation, then there would be more neighbours for such women to have, and they wouldn't be so much on their own. At the moment, part of the problem of women who problem who do decide to stay at home and raise their own children is that they are isolated in their own communities, that they may be the only people for miles doing the same thing.
I mean,
that's not necessarily the case.
No, but when I had my children, I mean, for example, I joined my NCT class. I went to all of the NCT classes. I didn't want to be friends with any of the people in my NCT class.
I'm very sorry to hear it.
So the idea that, everybody's having children together, therefore you can have a little community and you can all have lots of mates, doesn't really work like that. That's Stepford Wives territory.
I can't do everything. It's not Stepford Wives. Have you read Stepford Wives? It's not Stepford Wives territory at all. It has nothing to do with Stepford Wives territory. Stepford Wives, they were murdered to make way for plastic robots who served their husbands every desire and kept the place clean. Nothing to do with childcare.
No, but it was a sort of similar principle. But my point is, children are fantastic, but they are not straightforward. Some women, quite understandably, would like something a little bit more intellectually challenging than doing the wheels on the bus go round and round 73 times a day.
I'm not proposing to compel you to stay at home. If that's what you want to do, do it. If that's what you don't want to do, don't do it. What I'm saying is that our society at the moment is designed around the ideas of a communist fellow traveller called Betty Friedan, who had exactly the same views of how to run childhood as the East German state, which is basically get them into nurseries as soon as possible and march women off into wage slavery. And it's more or less compulsory for most people unless they've got some alternative source of income, and they have to do it.
I disagree with that.
No one has ever prevented you, and I don't argue that you should have been prevented from having the life that you've led. What you should recognize is that by designing society around people like you, you're making life very hard for those people who are not like you.
Well, that's a very valid point. But what
it
I would
is too,
say
isn't
about,
it? I agree with you. It is a valid point.
What I would say about childcare is that at the moment in this country, no employer offers any degree of sensible childcare. There's no creche. There's no. I can't.
They'd all go bankrupt if they did. One of the things about real top grade childcare, as provided by real top grade parents, is that it is almost impossible to afford. The sort of childcare which would actually substitute for the real care of an actual parent is so expensive to obtain, as it were artificially. How can you expect employers to provide it? They would, as I say, go bankrupt. They might be able to employ you for a few months until they went underwater from the huge costs of providing this childcare. It's not going to happen. One of the other reasons why this policy is such a disaster
is that women
is
it's
economically impracticable.
Well, exactly. So what we're saying is that actually, what you're saying, what we're saying, what the conversation is actually the country would be better off if women just stayed at home and did all the free childcare.
No, you caricatured, and I'll finish by saying I don't mind.
And that's really what we should be doing.
No, I don't mind if it's women or men who stay at home, but the country would be happier, more healthy, more civilized, better educated, and in every way better if children were raised by their own parents instead of by paid strangers. And that's the point at which I think
parent.
we
it doesn't
should
have to be women.
I just said that. You're the only one, Sarah, who's introduced into this argument the idea, which I do not hold, that it should only be women. I don't have that view.
But it is more likely to be women.
Well,
isn't
that's as maybe, but it's nothing. No presumption in law or indeed in custom should assume that it must be women.
Yes, but if you're saying that it's not fair for a woman to have to go and work in a call centre, then why is it fair for a man to have to go and work in a call centre?
No, it's nothing to do with fairness. Life is not fair, and it never will be. What it's to do with is an intelligent use of our nation's skills to send people to work in call centres who would be better off and would also be enjoying themselves more if they raised their own children. I believe we've probably exhausted this subject.
If we feel we've exhausted it, we have exhausted it.
Let us move on, because we have to deal with
Let us move on. Yes, we have some letters. But before that, I'm just going to say the email address in case you would like to weigh in. It's alas@mailonline.co.uk. We have some very nice letters. Joseph from Surrey says, on the issue of head coverings, which we discussed in the last episode, I think there's a marked difference between the way in which headscarves were once modestly worn by Christian women in Western societies, as well as the late Queen, and the hijab, which appears to be more tightly bound to and covers far more of the head. On the matter of burqas and niqabs, I recently read an interesting article by a blogger who grew up in Bradford, who suggested that the wearing of these items by women, as well as a shalwar kameez by men, is a deliberate symbol of separatism and rejection of Western cultural norms by Pakistani Muslims. What do you think, Peter?
Well, I think there's something in both points, but it's not universally true. And again, if we want people who live in this country who've come from places with wholly different customs and traditions and indeed morals, if we want them to integrate, then the best way to do so is to show them by example that our way of doing things is better than theirs, or indeed say we don't mind if people live differently among us. We're tolerant of difference, and let them see if they prefer what we do. And in time, I think that would lead to. I'm against multiculturalism. That would lead to an enriched monoculture in which their ideas were respected, but in which ours predominated. But I think there are aspects, as I say, of Muslim morality, which many people who look at this country and see it as I do as a moral sink find quite appealing. And I don't look down on people living amidst us who think that in some ways we live in a decayed and in fact decadent society. So that might be a response to that. If we want those living among us who've come from different traditions to embrace our traditions, then perhaps we ought to be more loyal to those traditions ourselves.
Yes, I do think that wearing a shalwar kameez or any of those things I think it's a sort of outward statement of your religious faith, really, isn't it? It's a bit like wearing a crucifix or...
It could be. There are many different reasons why you might do it, including the reason that Joseph suggests that they might be using as a deliberate gesture.
Well, they want to mark themselves
separatism. That's perfectly possible. In either case, it's a failure of our society. If we don't encourage people to, since they've taken the trouble, and it's a major trouble, I've uprooted countries myself, taken the trouble to come to live in a different country, if we don't make it attractive enough for them to adopt insofar as possible its customs, Maybe they don't like some of our customs, but I always remember the Blair creature saying at some point during the aftermath of the September the 11th outrage, condemning the Taliban, I think it's saying, they said, they hate our way of life. And I shouted at the television, I hate our way of life too.
Not enough to blow up the Twin Towers.
No, but the Taliban didn't blow the Twin Towers. It happens. That was the Mujahideen who had originally been sponsored by guess who. Anyway, that's another subject.
Alas, it says, Ford Probe gets a mention. And of course, Peter is clueless. It was basically a Mazda MX-6.
What does he mean, clueless?
I don't know. Let me finish. It was basically a Mazda MX-6. That's why it was so well engineered for a Ford. I had one and loved it, Dan, via Spotify. Do you know what a Mazda MX-6 is?
Of course not. I don't care either. General knowledge is stuff you're ashamed of not knowing. Knowing what a Mazda...
What car do you drive, Peter?
I have no idea. I very rarely drive. I tend only to drive to go to the...
Do you have a car?
To go to the... Yes, I go to... but it's Mrs. Hitchens uses it much more than I, and other members of our family do too. I only use it to drive.
What is it?
I don't know. I only use it. I don't. I only use it to drive to the funerals of friends who insist on being buried in country churchyards. I can't get there any other way. I don't know what kind of car it is. I don't care.
Your homework for next week is to tell us what car you drive. Okay?
Why?
You have to go home. You look at the little thing on the steering wheel.
But what does it matter? It's a small car. It has, as far as I can tell, all the necessary equipment to be illegally allowed on the road. What else do I care about it? I hate cars. I wouldn't use it. I wouldn't use it if Ernest Marples hadn't ripped up all the railway lines to the places where my friends get buried.
Hello, Peter and Sarah. I love this email. Great to finally hear Peter on his own podcast. Yes, it is your podcast, Peter.
No. It would be nothing. It would be nothing without you, Sarah.
And anyone willing to share a platform with him must be a powerhouse in their own right.
Yeah.
This is from Curtis in London. And he says, my question to you is, have you ever read the book The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Fristenberg?
No, I'm afraid.
I have not read it.
I haven't read it.
He says, after becoming a hum sufferer 5 years ago, you can see the hum map online by a quick Google, I began experiencing a hugely debilitating issue of this constant pulsating drone, particularly in buildings. I wonder whether the possibility of industrialized electropollution could be slowly depreciating human health at a micro scale over time. I'd love to hear your thoughts, as I've been banging the drum about this to so many people, only to have a similar experience to Peter in that people think I'm just crazy. Also, I heard Peter mention that there are things worse than war, and I wanted to ask if Peter could offer me some examples. What do you think, Peter?
Okay, well, first about the hum. I have heard about this. It must be. I don't doubt that people are experiencing this, and it must become a real torture in life, and it makes it worse if other people say, I can't hear it, what do you want about? There's also been this fascinating case of the American embassy in Havana and the people there who believe they were the victims of some kind of sound projection, which is, and unwanted sound is a horrible thing, and I probably ought to look it up and find out more about it. But I haven't read the book, and perhaps I should. On the question of worse than war, I mean, generally giving in can lead to the most terrible things. Poland, of course, did not give in, but between 1939 and 1945, it underwent such hideous treatment that it's almost impossible to imagine how foul it was. And I think if they'd been able to carry on fighting, I think an awful lot of people in Poland would have wished to do so rather than undergo first the Nazis and then the Soviets and then the Soviets again. Poland, in fact, didn't emerge from the horrors of war until nearly 50 years later. In fact, more than 50 years later. We really only got free of it in 1989. So that was definitely worse than war. The oppression and enslavement are, I think, worse than war. War sometimes has to be fought.
I suffer quite badly from tinnitus, actually, which comes and goes. Sometimes it's very loud and sometimes it's not so loud. And I don't know why. No one knows. I mean, no one knows what causes tinnitus. I think personally it's me. I used to have a lot of ear infections as a child, and I was a big swimmer when I was younger. And I think I was always having these terrible ear infections, otitis, the whole time. But I really sympathize with you, Curtis, because I have a constant ringing in my ears. And sometimes it does, I have to say, drive me slightly nuts. Tom from Kent. Dear Sarah Peter, I have been thoroughly enjoying the podcast, particularly your book and film recommendations, and I was wondering what are the funniest books you have read? My vote goes to the James Herriot books and the Flashman novels. I love Flashman. Peter, you like Flashman, don't you?
I do, but less than I used to. And
oh, really? How interesting. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because when I first read them in my 20s, I was more like Flashman than I am now.
Yeah.
And also because on first acquaintance, they are absolutely side-achingly funny on a first, and the early ones as well. In the end, it became a bit of a franchise. Are better than the old ones, but on rereading, it's not quite so funny. I mean, his participation in the charge of the Light Brigade, during which he has severe flatulence, on the first reading is absolutely,
if you're a schoolboy,
impossibly funny, which I remain and will see on the question. It is extraordinarily funny, but it doesn't last me. There's a passage, however, if you want something really funny, in a book by Kingsley Amis called Girl 20, which is an intensely sad book and a brilliant book and one of the best books Kingsley Amis wrote and one of the best books published in the second half of the 20th century. But there's a passage in it which men find funny and women do not, which is about an all-in wrestling match. And I can't remember the page on which it takes place, but if you haven't read that book, you should read it anyway, and you will come to this passage. And if you are a man, you will be absolutely convulsed by it, but if you're a woman, you'll go po-faced through it and not find it funny at all. I don't quite know why not. It just is, but it's really, really, really funny, and it's funny every time for me. It doesn't matter how many times I read it; it keeps on being funny.
I used to really enjoy Terry Pratchett's books. They used to really, really make me laugh. The Discworld series. But also one of my favourite books is, what's it called? Fotherington Thomas. Hello Tree, Hello Sky.
Oh, you mean the Molesworth books?
The Molesworth books.
But they're all true. The problem with them is if you went to an English prep school in the 1950s and 1960s, these are simply accounts of the world as it actually was. That's their brilliance.
They're just really funny. They just always make me laugh.
And the Roald Searle pictures as well. But
the pictures are brilliant. And the Gerund. The Gerunds
and of course the Prunes.
The Prunes. And so I love that. I love Terry Pratchett. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy used to make me laugh a lot. But there are some things
which will occasionally make you shout with laughter, just like that. But in one tiny passage which takes you by surprise, that happens to me perhaps once every couple of weeks when I'm reading. But that's not the same thing as the convulsive laughter, which the repeated 1,000-bomber raid, like the wrestling scene in Girl 20.
I shall look it up.
Oh, you should. You won't find it funny at all.
I might find it funny.
I challenge you to find it funny. You'll be the only woman I've ever encountered who does find it funny. So.
It's true that women and men find different things funny.
Do.
Definitely.
I can't imagine why that would be, because we're obviously exactly the same, aren't we?
It's very the same. Anyway, thank you for listening. That's all we've got time for. We're back next week. Don't forget to check out this week's reading list and share the books, TV and films you think we might want to read or watch. For that or anything else, you can contact us at alas@mailonline.co.uk. You can leave a comment on Spotify, or you can send us a voice note on WhatsApp 077 96 657 512. Start your message with the word alas.